There's no way out for Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth going forward. What transpired this weekend will be the end of his presidency, should he live long enough to make it out of this term alive. Let me tell you, there is no question in my mind that both Democratic and Republican leadership are, so to speak, gunning for Pete Hegseth. And Donald Trump thinks he can throw Hegseth under the bus, but it is not going to be that easy. Let me start with what I am talking about. The breaking legal news this weekend came from the Washington Post this Friday, when the Post reported out that the very first attack from the Trump administration on so-called drug trafficking boats in the Caribbean that happened on September 2nd. The reporting from the Washington Post on Friday was about that September 2nd boat attack. And what the Washington Post revealed on Friday was that even if we accept, which we shouldn't, the argument from the Trump administration that the United States is at war in an armed conflict with these non-nation state drug traffickers, these gangs from Venezuela, that even if we accept that, what went down on September 2nd, and I keep saying September 2nd, but I think, yes, that is correct, that what went down on September 2nd is at the very least a war crime. And this is huge. This is huge. So let me just back up and say where the consensus is among legal experts, and I've consulted with my own colleagues on this too, and read up on this, legal experts who are experts in international law and the law of armed combat, uniformly agree that either what happened with the targeting, the drone attack on this particular boat on September 2nd in the Caribbean, that what went down there has to be either murder under U.S. law or a war crime under U.S. law, or maybe both. So why is it important to make these distinctions? Why do I keep saying, even if we accept that this was legitimate or, lawful armed conflict? Why do I keep saying that? This is hugely important, you guys. Given the way in which Congress over the years has abdicated its responsibility for declaring war, because Congress is supposed to be the branch of government that declares war, but you may also know that they haven't really been doing that, and they have been giving a lot of authority for the president, for the executive. Actually, I don't like calling him the executive, for the president to get involved in these armed conflicts. And I'm not going to go into those particular details, but given that recently historic leeway, it might be more difficult to ultimately convince a court that this was merely murder under the federal criminal code. It might be. Now, I'm going to walk through why I think it is, but dropping a drone on a ship and killing, I think it was, killing at that time nearly a dozen people on it. And by the way, there were 2 hits on this, but we'll get to that. Doing that, if that's all they did, I think there's a strong argument that it's murder. However, if, given again the leeway in which we have allowed presidents to get engaged in armed conflict, even against non-nation state actors without explicit approval from Congress, the way that has, using some sort of blanket authorization, the way that has happened might make that in doubt. Okay, so that's step 1. So if it could not be proven that this was murder, this strike that Hegseth commanded, and then all the way down the chain to the person who, pulls the trigger, if that cannot be proven that first command was unlawful, then we can't say that every single person down the chain could be charged with murder. We could. However, and this is the trap that Trump and Hegseth are in, if they want to avoid that being called murder, which of course, when it is murder in federal, when it's murder in this situation where it would have taken place in international waters here, it would be a situation where it would be federal jurisdiction and the death penalty could apply. So just to be very clear, if it's in the so-called special maritime and territorial jurisdiction of the United States, I said this was international water, but I believe this happened in, just to be clear, this happened in U.S. water. At any rate, the point is, this would be subject to the federal criminal code for which there is a death penalty. Fine. Now, like I said, here's the trap. They don't want to be charged with murder. None of those people. Donald Trump does not want to have to pardon everyone from Hegseth all the way down for murder, right? They want to say it's not murder. And this, again, is the trap they put themselves in. If what went down on September 2nd, as well as the, nearly 2 dozen, it's like, I think there have been more than 80 people killed on these boats, both in the Caribbean and in the Pacific near South America. There have been around 80 people killed, and this is over, 20 boats we're talking about. But I'm talking about the first boat. This is important because it was a bit different on that boat. If that isn't called murder, if the strikes on these so-called alleged drug trafficking boats is not considered murder, then the only avenue to go to is that this was an armed conflict. And under U.S. law, as well as international law, we'll get to that second, but most importantly, under U.S. law, it is like 101, like basic training, that if you, let's say, attack a boat in this case, or you attack somebody, specifically, let's look at a boat. If someone is shipwrecked, if they are hanging off the edge of a boat, this is literally an example given in defense manuals. You may not kill them. It is a war crime to do so. You're supposed to rescue them, period. In international law, it's called hors de combat, HORSDE combat, right? I'm pronouncing the French wrong. And the idea is, under both U.S. law and international law, and I'm simplifying this here, the idea is if someone is supposedly an enemy combatant, but they are not capable of attacking, then you must treat them in a humanitarian way. This is part of what the Geneva Convention is about, and this is also part of U.S. law. Okay? So this is huge. And I'm not making this up. So you might ask, okay, um, what are we actually talking about? And why am I suggesting that Pete Hegseth is responsible for that? And let me walk you through what the Washington Post said. What they said happened on September 2nd was that the United States, on September 2nd, this first strike, right? And I'm gonna share this piece with you because this was groundbreaking when it broke on Friday. So let me pull this up for you. Okay, so you can see this article here, and let me just open this. Okay, so Hegseth order on first Caribbean boat strike, officials say, kill them all. Why is this important? Okay, let me explain this. At the outset, when Hegseth said to strike the boat, to say kill them all at the outset is called giving no quarter. It goes against this notion that if he strikes the boat and they're not dead, you are supposed to rescue them. And as you may remember, after that, later, in one of the later strikes, I think it was later in September or October, there have been occasions where, 2 different occasions, where our military struck a boat and there were survivors. And in both instances, we rescued the survivors and quickly sent them back to their countries, in part mainly so they couldn't challenge their detention, and also so the press wouldn't find out that maybe these people were not drug traffickers. Okay, so that happened later, but with this first strike, it was called a two-tap. What that means, according to the Post, and let me just share this again with you, that when the first strike happened, and this was SEAL Team 6, the person who was called the Joint Special Operations Commander, this man followed Hegseth's order to kill them all. So he saw 2 men clinging to this boat. And what did they do? They struck it a second time. So this was a boat where there were 11 people on board. They had enough visibility. These are the same people, folks. This is the same group who is claiming they have enough visibility with their cameras, with their lenses, that they could claim they could see drugs on the boat. And they knew there were 11 people. And after that first strike, while that ship was smoldering, the commander struck again, instead of rescuing these 2 people clinging to the wreck. Okay? So what we know from the reporting is a couple things. We know that at the allegations in the reporting are simply that Hegseth's order was kill them all. What we do not know at this point is whether Hegseth was informed or was watching the video and further said either 1, hit them again, or rescue those guys. We don't know if that happened. However, we don't know. That is not reported. But what is reported out is that the guy in charge of Special Operations Forces believed he was following the order from Hegseth to kill them all. So this is SEAL Team 6. And what I am saying is that there is pretty much no question, if those are the facts, that this is, again, either, as I said, murder, or if we accept that this is a lawful operation, then it is a war crime. And we have experts, a guy named Todd Huntley from Georgetown Law School, who spoke in this article, who was interviewed by the Post, saying, and by the way, he is a former military lawyer. He actually advised these special operation forces for 7 years. So he's not living in an ivory tower. He's at Georgetown, and he knows from whence he speaks. And he said, an order such as the one that Hegseth gave, which is to kill them all, and I'm going to quote Huntley, would in essence be an order to show no quarter, which would be a war crime. Okay. Now, at the time this happened on September 2nd, Donald Trump put out a video. It was like a 30-second video showing this surveillance drone video. This video from the surveillance drone showing the attack. It was edited. It did not include the second strike. Okay. So at the time, there were people who were concerned about this, and there have been congressional briefings since then. But Friday was the first time that we had heard reported out by the Washington Post in the mainstream press that this had been a second strike, which of course would be a war crime. Now, the person, the fallout of this is, of course, Pete Hegseth is just doubling down on this. On his personal account, he said, we have only just begun to kill narco-terrorists. And from the social media post from his official account on Twitter, he said that these were highly effective strikes designed to be, quote, lethal kinetic strikes. He said they were lawful under both U.S. and international law. Okay, so guys, a couple things from here. You might wonder, where were the lawyers at the time? You might also wonder, what is the penalty for this kind of war crime? And first of all, we are not signatories to the International Criminal Court, so no one is going to The Hague from the United States. However, this is without question, again, either murder or a war crime. Now, what I want to now share with you, which is kind of incredible, is this. Just quickly, I'll show it on the screen because it's kind of small type. This is a memo. Now I'm going to remove it and tell you what it says. This is and I'm going to throw it in the chat if I can do this. This was published on the Just Security website. This is a statement made by the former so-called JAGS working group on media reports of this no quarter order. And this was put up on Friday. So I've got a lot of translation here for you. So the JAGs in the military, I think some of you may already know this, but the JAGs are the Judge Advocate General's Corps. And these head lawyers, by the way, you might not remember this entirely, but Pete Hegseth, early this year, fired some the head JAGs, the head JAGs leading, I think, the Army and Navy, and even the Air Force. So that happened. Hegseth fired them on February 24th. So he had already fired the top military lawyers, saying they weren't well suited for their jobs, right? So keep in mind this: he had fired these folks. This is the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. So they, of course, the lead lawyers weren't even around to tell him if he had chosen to ask what his plans were, if they were lawful. And to be clear, you probably remember the deranged address at Quantico where Pete Hegseth brought in all of the military brass, and he and Donald Trump gave speeches to them, and none of them applauded. And you might remember that during that, Hegseth, and I'm going to quote for you, said the following. Okay, so he actually said this. I'm going to share this with you because I have this pretty large on my own Blue Sky here. Okay, this is Hegseth at that rally. We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our war fighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement, just common sense, maximum lethality, and authority for war fighters. He was telling us what he was planning to do, right? That was in September. He gave that speech just weeks after these murders or war crimes. Okay, now let me tell you about that memo that came out this weekend. So this is a former working group of the JAGs, these military lawyers. And I'm going to tell you what they said. Yesterday, the Washington Post and CNN reported that the Secretary of Defense personally issued orders to, quote unquote, kill everybody aboard a civilian vessel suspected of narco trafficking. The attack on the 2nd of September, 2025 targeted a vessel carrying 11 civilians and allegedly an unknown quantity of drugs. The first strike resulted in near total destruction of the vessel. However, 2 survivors were apparently observed via surveillance video clinging to the wreckage, whereupon the commander directing the operation ordered a second strike. The second strike killed both survivors. Then they go on, they go on to say, essentially as follows. By the way, this working group, they said, was established after in February, Hegseth fired the top lawyers. And he was systematically dismantling, they said, the military's legal guardrails. They added, quote, had these guardrails been in place, we are confident they would have prevented these crimes. So here's what they said in the analysis. If the U.S. military operation is not an armed conflict of any kind, these orders to kill helpless civilians clinging to the wreckage of a vessel our military destroyed would subject everyone from the Secretary of Defense down to the individual who pulled the trigger to prosecution under U.S. law for murder. However, if they considered this operation to interdict and destroy suspected narco trafficking vessels to be a, quote, non-international armed conflict, end quote, as the Trump administration suggests, then the orders to, quote unquote, kill everybody could, they said, reasonably be regarded as an order to give, quote, no quarters and to, quote, double tap a target in order to kill survivors are clearly illegal under international law. In short, they are war crimes. Okay, so bottom line here, this is, they go through in great detail in this memo. I think I was telling you I was going to give you, if I haven't done it already, I'm going to drop it in the chat for you to see. This is very serious. Now, I mean, this is super detailed, but it is only 4.5 pages. In terms of the war crime statutes, let me just give you this deal because I love the legal piece of this. And I am going to now open this up so you can see. I think I can do this now. I want you to see the full statutes now. Okay, give me a second. You're going to love this. Trust me. Let's do this. Okay. So this is the statute. I think the statute's here. And guys, I know if you're on your phone, it's going to be hard to see. But I want you to be able to see that this is the real deal. So applicable U.S. law. We have, if it's murder, 18 U.S.C. 1111. Okay. If it's a war crime, it's 18 U.S.C. 2441. Plus, there is separately the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which would also, if it was considered murder, apply. Okay. Now, what about is just following orders a defense? Let me read this to you. It is a defense to any offense that the accused was acting pursuant to orders unless the accused knew the orders to be unlawful, or a person of ordinary sense and understanding would have known the orders to be unlawful. And yeah, that is true. We're talking about this is a clearly unlawful order. Folks are always trained on, literally on shipwreck survivors. And I want to go to the statute on war crimes, right? If something, I just want to be clear, if something, in case you were wondering, this is real super important to me. I keep saying war crime, war crime, war crime. What's the penalty? Because the penalty for murder in this instance, we know, can be up to and including, depending on where the, if it's considered first degree or second degree murder under the federal code, it could be the death penalty or life in prison. But what about a war crime? Let's take a look at this statute here. It says, what are the possibilities? Offense, whoever, whether inside or outside the United States, commits a war crime in any of the circumstances described in subsection B shall be fined under the title or imprisoned for life or any term of years or both. And if death results to the victim, shall also be subject to the penalty of death. Death penalty. Where would it have to occur? There is jurisdiction over an offense described above, a war crime, if it occurs in whole or in part within the United States, or, and they go on to say, regardless if it's where it occurs, if it's like a U.S. Victim, we also have, regardless of where the offense occurs, the offender is present in the United States, regardless of the nationality of the victim or offender. This has these folks covered. Now, what is a definition of a war crime? This is where we bring in the Geneva Convention and other aspects here. And I'm going to not get into too much of the weeds of this at this moment, but what we're talking about here, I think you're getting this. No matter what they argue, if the facts that the Post reported are true, if Hegseth said, kill them all, and that is the order that the special commander gave all the way down the chain, this is either murder, which could be punishable by death or life in prison, or it is a war crime, which could be punishable by death or life in prison. Okay, I think I've explained that to you. Now, I also want to say, in fairness to the reporting by The Intercept, that the Washington Post was not the first to report this out. Now, the Post had some unique information here. However, back in September, a little over a week after that first strike, The Intercept publication did share some information, which apparently, I guess the Post at the time and others were not able to corroborate. But I want to make clear, and I'm trying to find the Intercept link. Let me just find that for you and give that author credit for his work. Okay, here we go. And let me share this tab with you so you can see a guy named Nick Terse of The Intercept. And here was his piece in September 10th, right? So we're talking about just a little over a week. And he said at the time, U.S. attacked boat near Venezuela multiple times to kill survivors. Multiple times to kill survivors. Nick Terse, multiple times to kill survivors. He had this reporting. And I'm just going to share with you, this is a screenshot. Donald Trump had posted this on September 2nd. This is showing a military strike on this boat in the Caribbean. What you are looking at here is either murder or war crime, and somebody should be charged, and many people should be charged and subject to the full force of our law. Now, I just want to make clear that they reported this out, and obviously, somehow, some people, it said 2 American officials familiar with the matter leaked this to The Intercept at that time. So there are folks who have known about this since then and have been concerned. Now, you might be wondering, okay, I've talked about the JAG people, but are there any other folks who are experts? And yes, we have Jack Goldsmith, a Harvard law professor with expertise in national security law, and he is recently writing about this very situation. Let me just share this with you. I think this is one of the best write-ups I have seen so far that will help you see what this is about. And I'm going to drop this in the chat for you so you can read it at your leisure. Okay, so here we have this piece. This is Jack Goldsmith, and he calls it on his Substack, or on his, actually it's on a Substack, executivefunctions.org, a dishonorable strike. Professor Goldsmith says, indulging all assumptions in favor of the administration's boat strikes, killing helpless men is murder. And he kind of, he goes through this attempt. He goes through an attempt by the Office of Legal Counsel. Well, let me just skip to this one part. He said, there can be no conceivable legal justification for what the Washington Post reported on Friday, that U.S. Special Operations Forces killed the survivors of a first strike on a drug boat off the coast of Trinidad, who, in the Post's words, were clinging in the smoldering wreck. Goldsmith goes through and quotes the Department of Defense Law of War Manual, and it literally says in Section 5.4.7, prohibition against declaring that no quarter be given. It is forbidden to declare that no quarter will be given. This means that it is prohibited to order that legitimate offers of surrender will be refused, or that detainees, such as unprivileged belligerents, will be summarily executed. Okay. And it adds, this rule is based on both humanitarian and military considerations. This rule also applies during non-international armed conflict. That means not with the nation state. That is what Trump is arguing this is. This is grounded, goes back to 1907. They're talking about with the Hague, and also in the US, the 1863 Lieber Code, dating back to the Civil War. Okay, this is deep, deep in the code. And they also say, the manual also defines this order to combat to include persons otherwise incapacitated by shipwreck. It's literally in the book. So he says, in short, if the Post facts are correct, it appears that Special Operations Forces committed murder when the two men were blown apart in the water. Now, he's calling it murder. I think in this case, we're talking about a war crime, right? Is what he is getting at here. So I am being a little more specific. It's a war. It's either murder because the whole thing wasn't justified, or it's the type of murder that constitutes a war crime and gets punished under that separate statute that we talked about. Okay. So what was going on yesterday? Well, yesterday, Democrats and Republicans in leadership, the people who chair, the Republicans who chair the Armed Services Committee in the Senate and House, and the ranking member, which is the highest level Democrat. So sort of, you could think of them as a co-chair, but they're below the chair. The leadership, the Republican and Democrat in the House and Senate Armed Services Committee are demanding information and investigations. I'm going to share with you what we saw here from Rep. Don Bacon, and he is House Republican who is going to comment on this. Don Bacon is a House Republican from Nebraska, and I'd like to, he wants to get the facts, obviously, on this, but he is very concerned. This is, again, separate from what I was talking to you about investigations from the committees. Let me share this with you. Oops, sorry, guys. I just need to play that. Here we go.
The Venezuelan alleged drug boat that was struck one time, but then a second time as two survivors were clinging to the wreckage of the boat. Your committee, you're on the Armed Services Committee, is going to be investigating this, according to your chairman. How concerned are you that this may have been a real violation of the way, even if there's a question of whether or not we're at war, but that this would violate the laws of warfare?
Well, it is a big concern. Now, Secretary of Defense Hegseth denies it. We should get to the truth. I don't think he would be foolish enough to make this decision to say, kill everybody, kill the survivors, because that's a clear violation of the law of war. So I'm very suspicious that he would have done something like that, because it would go against common sense. So let's get the facts. And if the facts go to where the Washington Post article takes it, well, then we'll have to go from there. But if it was as if the article said, that is a violation of the law of war. When people want to surrender, you don't kill them, and they have to pose an imminent threat. It's hard to believe that two people on a raft trying to survive would pose an imminent threat. So let's get the facts first. The Secretary Hegseth deserves his day to present his side of the story.
And in
Wow, right? You see, I don't know if you see what's happening there. They are throwing Hegseth under the bus. He is not the chair, but he's on the House Armed Services Committee. When you say if this reporting is correct, and I can't imagine he would want to do that, this is very different from the usual, oh, I didn't read that, I don't know anything about that. This is a direct condemnation of Hegseth if these facts are true. And Bacon is being judicious when he says, let him tell his side of the story. Hegseth has not denied the facts. This is really tantamount to throwing this guy under the bus. Now, you probably also wonder, what about Donald Trump on this, right? What has he had to say? Because I know we're all thinking he'll just pardon Hegseth, but it's not just Hegseth, right? It's much more than that. So I'd like to share with you when he is asked about this on his I don't know where he was going yesterday, why he was on Air Force One, because over the weekend he was looking like death warmed over, falling asleep at his golf club over breakfast, and also even in the motorcade. I mean, the photo at breakfast falling asleep came apparently to I think it was Tim Miller was sent it by somebody. So it's not been, I think, authenticated the way I'd want to, but I did look on Getty Images and he looked just as bad in his motorcade, in the Beast, when he was traveling from his golf club to Mar-a-Lago itself. He was slack jawed in the same outfit and looking dazed, but he obviously pulled it together enough to get on an airplane and throw Pete Hegseth under the bus. Let's watch this.
Just for clarity, if there, on the Venezuela boat strike, if there were a second strike that killed millions of people and in the first strike, are you thinking that would be legal?
I don't know that happened. And Pete said he did not want them. He didn't even know what people were talking about. So we'll look into it. But no, I wouldn't have wanted a second strike. The first strike was very lethal. It was fine. And if there were two people around, but Pete said that didn't happen.
Does that make
I have great confidence.
He's saying there's no second strike?
I don't know. I'm going to find out about it. But Pete said he did not order the death of those two men.
Do you have any concerns about how those boat strikes have been carried out at all?
Very little, because you can see the boats, you can see the drugs in the boats, and each boat is responsible for killing 25,000 Americans. So, and they're doing an amazing job.
Just for clarity.
So what's interesting there is somehow Donald Trump thinks he can parse this. He's saying, I wouldn't have wanted a second strike. He said, he's making it sound like it matters whether Pete gave an explicit order to do the second strike or not. And it doesn't. To give the order at the outset to kill everybody in and of itself is an order to do whatever it takes, as many strikes as necessary. Okay, guys? You might also remember that sometime after this, I think it was either later September, early October, the head of the Southern Command resigned. Okay? And he resigned. So the current head of the Southern Command is Admiral Halsey. Well, hold on one second. The Admiral Halsey stepped down, October 16th. He left his job as head of the Southern Command. When he did that, people were not sure. Why? Hegseth at the time said, didn't say why, just said he thanked him. And at the time, Adam Smith said he doesn't think he can think of a commander who left their post early ever. So I think the thinking was, and now you can kind of see it, he may have, I just want to give you a timeline here. The second tap, the killing these two people clinging to this smoldering wreck, happens on September 2nd, right? Then later, the timeline was that the boat strikes, that there was, I had been looking at this, the timeline there, and this is as of mid-November, that the first strike happened September 2nd, right? Then there was a strike on September 15th, and then the 19th, then October 3rd, right? These are ramping up. And, okay, so keep in mind that the head of the Southern Command doesn't step down until the 16th. Well, what happens then? On the 16th, the day he stepped down, there was a strike that hit a boat in the Caribbean, and there were 3 survivors. I'm sorry, there were survivors. It says that there were two in this boat. There were two survivors who were released to Colombia and Ecuador within hours, and that was the day. On the same day, Halsey stepped down. So I am wondering whether he didn't know until that day that there had been survivors before. That seems unlikely because The Intercept had done the reporting. But there was something about them saving those survivors that day, and then the same day he steps down. So obviously something changed where they realized they had to do this. At any rate, I'm just kind of trying to piece these things together for you. Now, there's more. And I have I promise you that tomorrow I'm going to talk about the major pardoning or commutation of a sentence of a huge white collar criminal who defrauded thousands of investors out of $1.6 billion. Normally that would be the lead story, but I've got more for you here. Let's just focus on closing out this story. If the argument at the core of why this is even a legitimate military operation is that these boats are carrying cocaine or fentanyl to the U.S. to harm U.S. citizens, then you have to ask yourself why it is that yesterday or this weekend, Donald Trump announced that he is pardoning the former president of Honduras, who was convicted of drug trafficking and was about to report. His name is Juan Orlando Hernandez Alivardo. So Juan Orlando Hernandez, that Trump announced that he was pardoning him. And this is somebody who flooded the United States with cocaine far more than any of these boats put together that have been struck, ended up getting into the U.S. This is somebody who once said, according to the New York Times, this is Juan Orlando Hernandez, former, again, president of Honduras. He once, quote, said that he would, quote, stuff the drugs up the gringos' noses. I don't know if that's a translation, but it's pretty visual. At one point, Hernandez accepted a $1 million bribe from El Chapo, okay, to allow cocaine shipments to pass through Honduras. He was convicted of drug trafficking in the United States and sentenced to a 45-year prison sentence. This was considered to be the most, and I'm quoting the Times here, one of the most sweeping drug trafficking cases to come before a U.S. court since the trial of Noriega. Now, Friday, the same day that the Washington Post reported out this either murder or war crime with the targeting of the two-tap shooting down of this boat, killing these people clinging to it. That same day, Trump's announced that he was going to pardon Hernandez. Okay, this is obviously not rational. He had a 2-week trial in Manhattan. There were bags of cash, a machine gun that had his name on it. The prosecutors said, and the jury believed beyond a reasonable doubt, that Hernandez was the linchpin of a scheme that brought more than 500 tons of cocaine into the United States. So it's not a contradiction, actually, right? It's not a contradiction. It's actually, I guess what I would call it is fully consistent with what I've written about in the book, Big Dirty Money, and what we talked about with the dual state later. This is a book that was written in the 30s by Ernst Frankl. But in Big Dirty Money, I talk about, there's just two systems of justice in this country. And if you're wealthy and well-connected, in that instance, laws are just a suggestion. And you actually gain power and money by violating the laws that no one else can. And we have the same situation here. There are some people who suspect that Donald Trump doesn't care about drug trafficking. He just wants his piece of the action. Let me share with you, before we leave and before we go to Crazy Town, what Donald Trump had to say when he was pressed by reporters about the contradiction. Here we go.
You've made so clear how you want to keep drugs out of the U.S. Can you explain more about why you would pardon a notorious drug trafficker?
Well, I don't know who you're talking about. Which
Juan
one?
Fernando Hernandez.
Well, I was asked by Honduras, many of the people of Honduras, they said it was a Biden setup. Not only Biden, but Biden didn't do it a lot, but it was the people that surround the Resolute desk, surround Biden when he was there, which was about very little time. And the people of Honduras really thought he was set up and it was a terrible thing. He was the president of the country, and they basically said he was a drug dealer because he was the president of the country. And they said it was a Biden administration setup. And I looked at the facts and I agree with them.
What evidence did you share that he was set up and that he wasn't?
When you take a look, I mean, they could say that you take any country you want. If somebody sells drugs in that country, that doesn't mean you arrest the president and put him in jail for the rest of his life.
President, can I just clarify, taking the U.S.
That includes this country, okay?
Oh my God. Hold on.
They said it was a Biden setup. It was a Biden administration setup.
Let me just go back for a second here. A couple things
I mean, if
before.
somebody does something wrong, you put.
He's claiming that it was a setup, and he's claiming that people were just selling drugs in Honduras, and that's why they're blaming him. No, he was convicted for being a kingpin in the sale of these drugs, first of all. Second of all, that's what he wants to do with Maduro. But the next thing that he says is this is the man who was convicted on, was it 34 felony counts? His whole thing is he's claiming that this guy was just targeted because he was a leader. Let's continue playing this.
President of the country in jail. They said it was a Biden setup. It was a Biden administration setup. And you have a big race going on this week, next week. I think it's going to be a very important race. It'll be interesting to see Honduras. That's what you're talking about, right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. So, it's just a bunch of lies. It's favoring this guy because he's also trying to support the conservative who is running for president right now. It's same old, same old. And of course, I think people have had enough of this. Between this pardon and these murders / war crimes, and no one wanting us to go to war with Venezuela, and where the hell are the Epstein files, and why does the economy suck, and on, I think, oh, thank you, Gail. I think it's Gail Talbot. Is that or G Talbot? Thank you. I think that's where we are now. It is, of course, time for Crazy Town. It is. Let's do this. Okay. Crazy Town today is only Donald Trump. Only Donald Trump would. Only Donald Trump would you be able to. Only Donald Trump would be somebody who would get a medal. I shouldn't say only him. Someone of his age and with the kind of dementia he has. I shouldn't say age, but someone with his level of decrepitude and incuriosity and malevolent narcissism who thinks he can just say whatever. It's hard to know what he knows and what he thinks. But Donald Trump, people keep asking him about the MRI. And, MRI is an abbreviation for magnetic resonance imaging. And, you go into a machine for magnetic resonance imaging. And I'm going to, I'm going to show you a kind of a cool picture of this right now. Let me see if I can. Okay. I'm going to show you like a cool picture. This is someone going into an MRI machine. It looks super groovy unless you have claustrophobia, but if you're in need of a nap, sounds pretty good. It's not clear. It looks like this person might be going in to have their head scanned. To be clear, you can have numerous different body parts scanned, right? It's used to diagnose various issues. One thing it can be done is to show brain abnormalities. It can also show detailed images of organs and tissues and bones. And, often MRIs, if you're getting a brain scan, it could be to look for a brain tumor or stroke or MS, multiple sclerosis. You could have, MRI could be good if you have a herniated disc. It could show a heart condition. You could get an MRI to check out your gallbladder. I think that I'm not a doctor. But the thing is, I understand that an MRI is a machine, and I would know. I actually had an MRI once, and I was having severe headaches, very, very bad migraines, and I had to have an MRI of my brain. And I got a nice rest, but I sure as hell remember when that happened. And I know what body part it was, which leads us to Donald Trump. Okay. Here we go.
Very much, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. President.
This is a rocky flight. We're going to get out of here before something happens. But they asked about my MRI. MRIs are very...
Governor Walz asked you to release the MRI, right?
Will you tell us what it was
Governor
for?
Walz, you mean the incompetent governor? So if they want to release it, it's okay with me to release it. It's perfect.
What were they
It's like my phone call where I got impeached. It's absolutely perfect. So if you want to hear about it, or if you want to release it, you want to have it released.
Yes,
News Nation, failing News Nation. News Nation is doing lousy, by the way. But if you want to have it released, I'll release it.
Please, can you tell us what they were looking at?
For what, releasing?
No. What part of your body was the MRI looking
I
at?
have no idea. It was just an MRI. What part of the body? It wasn't the brain because I took a cognitive test and I aced it. I got a perfect mark, which you would be incapable of doing. Goodbye, everybody.
He doesn't know what part of his body. Does he even know what an MRI is? There he is telling someone that they wouldn't have been able to ace the cognitive test, which we have talked about before. That is not really a cognitive test, right? The so-called cognitive test is really screening. Well, it is a cognitive test, but it's not an IQ test. It's screening for cognitive impairment. This is the Montreal, you can look at it again, cognitive assessment. And I want, as many people have said, many of us want more than the MRI. We would like to see the result of his cognitive test. How did he draw the clock? I would love, I personally, I would love to see that. So there it is. I'm just going to pull that up right up on the screen so you can see that test. And I think you would like to know how Donald Trump did as well. I will see you tomorrow morning. Have a lovely first day of December.
Hello, prison mates. It's the Jen Taub Show. Well, welcome everyone. Let's learn about what is happening in politics yesterday and today. There is hope, and we are together in this democracy we work for. And again, welcome to the Jen Taub Show.